I'm Ella Colvin, Director of Publishing at Cambridge University Press, and I'm really delighted to participate in this conversation about peer review, during which we'll consider what good peer review looks like, whether it could be better, and along the way what role publishers play now and should be playing in the future to support it. I'm joined by 4 colleagues from different roles across the press and by 2 external speakers, Professor Kenneth Armstrong from the Faculty of Law at Cambridge University and Dr. Laurent Gatto from the Department of Biochemistry at Cambridge University. I know the panellists will introduce themselves as they join the conversation. Before we turn to the questions under review, I'd like to make a few comments about Cambridge's academic publishing programme and how peer review sits within it. Cambridge publishes over 400 journals and over 1,500 books annually, the books supporting both research outputs and higher education provision. I think an important thing to say is that our publishing spreads across so many different subjects across these 2 programmes, from the humanities, the social sciences and the STM subjects. We aim to set the highest standards across our journals and books publishing to sustain Cambridge's reputation for publishing excellence. We invest heavily in peer review support for our journals by providing infrastructure such as manuscript tracking systems and providing admin and editorial support time to deliver the overall peer review experience. And our in-house book editors take thousands of reports to validate and then develop the book projects we ultimately select to publish. I think what I'd like to underscore at this point is our gratitude to the thousands of reviewers and journal and series editors who support us in this endeavour. Without their thoughtful and detailed inputs, we wouldn't be able to offer our authors the editorial proposition that we do, through which we seek to drive improvement and ultimately excellence across the content published. I see the quality and range of the peer reviews generated across our different lists in our regular publishing meetings, at which book and journal projects are proposed and open to scrutiny by our Publishing Oversight Committee, the Press Syndicate, which comprises senior academics from within Cambridge University. An ever-present objective for us is to make the experience as positive and as easy for all as possible for the author, the reviewer, the editor. Transparency is also an important debate within peer review presently, and I hope we'll be able to share some insights today into how peer review happens at Cambridge during this conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Kenneth Armstrong to briefly introduce himself and then to kick off our consideration of what good peer review looks like.
Thanks, Ella. I'm Kenneth Armstrong, Professor of European Law at Cambridge, and fortunate enough to be a syndic of the press and sit on its academic publishing committee. I also edit one of the press's journals, the Cambridge Yearbook of European Legal Studies. So thinking about peer review, I was struck by the idea that, in fact, peer review has to face 2 different kind of challenges. The first is how do we use the existing expertise and knowledge that is out there in how we evaluate new books and evaluate new journal articles, etc. But at the same time allow for different contributors to challenge orthodoxies, to challenge conventional ways of thinking. And I think peer review has to try and manage that, standing on the shoulders of giants, but at the same time allowing people to challenge existing ways of thinking. And I suppose the other important part of peer review is that it's very context specific, and that's not just context in terms of differences between arts, humanities and sciences, but also the types of publications that a press like CUP produces. From the kind of peer review processes you have when launching a brand new journal is very different from the peer review processes one would put in place for managing an existing and established title, or putting out a new textbook that may have tens of thousands of sales compared with a monograph that maybe fewer. So trying to tailor peer review to the particular context also seems to me to be one of the big challenges. On that context side, what does good peer review mean? Well, of course, it's going to mean very different things. One is if it's a new journal or a new textbook, it's, I guess, looking at the proof of concept does this thing, even if it's a good idea, is it really going to play out in the way that you want it to play out once that book or new journal hits the market? For those well-established titles, well-established journals, you're probably just trying to manage volume. Because you're the best journal in the area, you're going to attract lots of submissions. So a clear thing that good peer review has to do is do a very sharp job of gatekeeping to allow people to focus on really that top quality work in the end. But I suppose other journals, including the one that I edit, it's also about establishing good relationships with authors. And the peer review process is a part of that, having a conversation with an author about their work and how to make it the best version of what it is that they're trying to do, that it can be. And I think that's, for me, good peer review is about having that level of communication. And you talked about transparency as well, so that there is transparency in the process, that people feel that their work is being taken seriously. So that to me would be important. I think the final thing I'd say about peer review on the book side of things, and I know it's something maybe you want to talk a little bit more about, but it's also what happens when something's published. It's ex post peer review. Did things work out the way the peer review thought they were going to work out? And I think there's space for trying to think a little bit more about kind of meta peer review of peer review, looking back on what we've done to see whether things played out in the way that we hoped and thought that they might. So that's kind of my sort of initial thoughts on what good peer review could be.
And Laurent, does some of that ring true for you?
Absolutely, yes. I realized that there are many common aspects that we value in peer review. I would note to assess the validity of output and how to improve its quality, and to do that through constructive comments. And I think I hear you when you talk about the conversation with the author. I think that is part of good peer review, allowing this conversation. And I think assessing the quality and the validity goes through assessing the data that underlies that research, much more, I think, than the relevance. So I put a lot of emphasis on the data, the software, and the method that really allows to assess the validity and the reproducibility of this research. Coming from my background, so I'm a computational biologist, in biochemistry, working with a lot of data, with a lot of software, and that, of course, influences what I feel is important in peer review. And my background, my research is very multidisciplinary, and I think peer review should also strive to be diverse and have many different inputs. My kind of research has an input in many different skills that underlie these outputs, and to some extent, I think good peer review should try to follow this trend that we have in research. Transparency, I think, is extremely important. That can go through open peer review, but it's not limited to that. I think understanding the system and favoring this discussion with the authors and the reviewers, I think, is a very important aspect of transparency. Then maybe there is another aspect which is timely. Nobody wants to wait month and month, at least in sciences, month and month before they get feedback on their research outputs. But I think, on the other hand, time should not get in the way of the quality of the peer review. So I think it's important to have multiple systems in place that can work in parallel. For instance, I think preprints are invaluable tools. It's coming now into biological sciences, has been out for many years in other fields. So I think combining different approaches to the dissemination of research, which include peer review, but not limited to peer review, I think are some important aspects of good peer review and dissemination of science and research.
Thank you. And Dan, obviously, working within our STM journals portfolio, your take on Laurence's perspectives there?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with all those things you've said, and I strongly believe that the main priority of peer reviewers is to act as the gatekeepers of quality for submissions from a journal's perspective. I also think they have a strong moral duty and obligation to help the authors, to help those different academic audiences in better presenting their submissions, their work, for consumption to the readers, if accepted, when published. And they do not act in isolation. They are supported by the editorial offices, who often will sanity check whether a submission is appropriate for a journal. There is then also, I think, a obligation on the publisher's side to ensure that those referees with limited time available, given all their other academic duties, have the best support in terms of the tools at their disposal, advice about workflows that can make the process as streamlined as possible. I think we also have to recognise that an editorial board's time, which includes those peer reviewers, is not wholly taken up with peer review. It's also about journal development. And that goes back to the point about ensuring that time is spent as constructively as possible on peer review. You also made the point, Laurent, about multidisciplinarity, and I think we need to ensure that that peer review pool is seen as an organic entity. It grows over time. We have to curate it. We have to ensure that the best individuals are there to reflect the scope of the journal, to respond to the submissions, and ensure that the authors get the best advice on how to improve their submissions for the journal's audiences.
Juanita, you work very much on peer review systems within the press. How do you feel you can support good peer review in your role?
I find it's reaching a balance between getting good quality reports and decisions within a good time frame. We don't want to rush the decision process without backing up the decisions themselves with good quality reports. And in order to do that, we need to find the right referees for the right manuscripts and the right editors to make those decisions, all based on their expertise and their experience as well. And we have like a two-step triage process, so that if a manuscript is of good quality but just not suitable for our journal, then it's triaged at that point, saving time for the authors. If they get the same decision further down the line, we want to give them that decision as soon as we can. So it's about getting the right manuscript to the right journal first of all, and then that right manuscript to the right editors and the right referees within the experience, so that they can provide good quality reports. And that's what I do, so I make sure that they're seen by the right people.
We've talked quite a bit about experience, and I think there's a piece around consistency of experience and how we as publishers can support that. And I think obviously a lot comes back to not just the infrastructure that we're providing, but the sort of advice that we're giving our editorial teams who are fielding so much of the heavy lifting in peer review. Monica, what's your take on that?
So I'm an editor here, and I work with, not only do I work already with open access journals, but I'm commissioning new ones, so new ideas. And the good thing about that is I can go to the editors or the people that want to be editors and say, where can we improve? Where can we do things different? Because it is more difficult to take a journal that has done something that has worked very well for them for a long time to modify that. It is easier to do with a new journal, say, where can we innovate? And I think we can innovate by, and especially should be my role, is to tell them where can we innovate. And I think I take Laurent's point. For example, we could be accepting preprints already at a lot of levels. We could say to the editors, go to those preprint servers and invite those interesting papers to our journal. That's an easy way to do, and it will ensure that the reviewers are already not focusing on things like novelty, but focusing on how can we improve this manuscript, because it already exists there. It is already interesting to our journal. So that's one way that we can improve our standards and we can innovate there. Another way is, do we want to try things like open peer review? Now, when I go out and I ask, this is a different type of reviewing, is asking my colleagues previous colleagues, I should say. I still think sometimes of myself as a researcher, so sorry for that. But my previous colleagues, and I say, look, we have an idea here. Is this a good journal? Can we innovate anyway? What about peer review? What about open peer review? Not everyone wants to jump in that bandwagon just yet. It's a bit scary. Exposing yourself as a reviewer can be a bit scary, but there's other ways to do it. You don't have to put your name to it. You can just maybe publish a review alongside with the paper. Is that something we want to try with some of our journals? That's something we're considering. Some people might think that that's not necessary and that readers are not going to look at a paper and see the reviews, but there will be people that will be interested in seeing how that paper progressed, and they will look at the peer review process. So what's the harm of having that? So I do think that there are potential to innovate. Having said that, I think my colleagues do a really good job at actually going back to the editors of existing journals and looking, for example, at the pool of reviewers that exist and ensuring that that pool is diverse. Do we have a gender bias? Do we have a geographic bias? Actually, your authors come quite a bit from, let's say, Central Asia. Do we have reviewers that reflect that? So you already do that quite well, and that's a part of. We don't show that to the public. Maybe we shouldn't, maybe we should. That's part of transparency. Maybe we should say that that's a publisher's role, is to help those editors.
No, that's really helpful, thank you. And Susie, obviously you bring slightly different perspectives to this, leading our Earth Science programme here at the Press. So.
Yeah. So I'm an executive publisher specifically for books, and peer reviewing for books looks somewhat different to journals, because what we're aiming to achieve is slightly different, and the range of products that we're dealing with is also different and quite broad. So for me, peer review is really serving two purposes. It's, again, gatekeeping for academic quality, which of course has to be essential, but it's all about market research as well. So as a book editor, my aim, particularly when we're having an initial proposal for a new product to review, is to find out, is there really a need for that product in the market? Obviously, the press is going to invest quite heavily in developing and publishing this book, and we want to make sure that we're investing wisely. So it's about being very clear about what the market wants, what the market needs, and helping craft that proposal to meet the needs of the market. And so there are two major things that I do as part of that process. One is working with an author who's interested in writing a book to help them craft a proposal that accurately reflects what they're aiming to write and who their target audience is. And making sure we've got all the information and in order to give the reviewers a really clear picture of what is planned. And then to actually solicit those reviewers from the market, which can be, quite a broad range of people. Speaking to Laurent's point about, multidisciplinarity, obviously very important to make sure we're surveying a really broad range of opinions, whether that's different subject areas, different types of reader and user, because books are not always written just for a single type of user. It might have a range of potential readers. A geographic perspective, as Monica has mentioned, making sure we're not biased either by gender or ethnicity or many of those things. So selecting people who can really give us really useful feedback, because I feel that we work in partnership with authors to try and help them create products that are going to have maximum impact in the market and sell as broadly as possible and be really useful. So it's not just about academic content, it's often about other things such as functionality. Should we be publishing the data that underlies some of the information in the book? It's about pedagogy, especially in textbooks. Have we got the right kind of questioning material or interactive exercises, online program codes, those things that help support teaching. So there are all these different aspects of a book making sure the art program is right. So we're asking our reviewers to comment on a number of different things, not literally just, is the academic content robust and accurate and appropriate, but is it complete? Does it cover everything that somebody's going to be looking for in this area? And is it presented appropriately? So we're possibly a third thing we're also asking is for reviewers to comment on our publishing plans. And this is like, should we be publishing it in colour throughout, or should we be considering a digital project as opposed to a traditional print book? What are price sensitivities in the markets and all these kind of things. So it looks, for books, peer review can look quite different, I think, to journals, but that underlying gatekeeping in terms of academic content is exactly the same.
So in terms of how we could be driving adaptation or innovation in peer review, I think we've been starting to tease out some alternative ideas, both about the process itself and the process post-publication. And I wonder if I could ask Kenneth or Laurent to sort of pick up on some of the ideas that they've put out there.
And I think one thing that really strikes me, and particularly maybe more on the journal side of things, is that we see more and more how important the digital side of journal publication is. That things are out there, as Lauren was speaking about, getting things out there quickly. People want to see their things online, even in advance of print publication, and yet there is the risk that the online side of things simply mirrors the scheduling of print publications, that we still think about publishing in the second or third or fourth issue of that year, rather than being a more continuous process, a continuous input, review, output. And I wonder when that does create some of the tensions that I think you talked about of, at what point are you trying to do the best peer review you can, but yet you're still running to a deadline because a journal works to those traditional deadlines. And I think there's maybe something we need to do there about trying to free ourselves from the legacy of the scheduling of past print publication. I also think that the more things are done as open access, new journals come on as open access, then open forms of review may seem to fit well with those, and that the innovation that drives an open access can also be the innovation that drives the peer review process. On the book side of things, I think it probably does remain more challenging to think about what innovation looks like there, and maybe for one good reason that it's challenging, which is, we're having this discussion here in the university press. Well, why do people want to publish their book with a university press? People can publish their books any way that they like these days. It's not difficult to publish a book, but what they want is the academic warrant. And that includes the peer review process. It's not just about the finished product will look nice, it will perform nicely as a book, but also that the academic, the review process is robust, and when a university press publishes a book, people know that it's had that level of care and attention towards it. So in the drive towards innovation, I don't think we want to lose something which makes certain forms of peer review important to where it is people choose to publish.
Thank you. And Laurent, bearing in mind you're working in a very particularly fast-moving, scaling area of research, how do you feel peer review should be adapting?
Well, I've tried to experiment myself not to talk about publishing, because I think the goal is to disseminate research outputs. And that is what I'm interested in. And I think we need to improve the quality of that, disseminating research outputs, not publishing a final product that maybe is scheduled to come out at a certain issue. That is a piece of paper, which at the end of the day is just the advertisement for the actual work that starts much, much earlier. And so, although I appreciate that there is a lot going on behind the scenes that I'm not aware of, but for me, publishers come at the very end, when the work is actually finished. So I think improving peer review and improving the quality of of these outputs starts much, much earlier and not at the very end. It's very difficult to ask a researcher to publish their data at the end when the research is finished, and then we say, oh, but where is your data? Where is your software? These are aspects that need to be considered at the very, very beginning. And in that respect, I think we need innovation. We need to open up the whole process of doing science, but from much, much earlier. I think at the very end, it's too late. And as you say, fast-moving field with many types of skills, many disciplines interacting. We need to start this process of discussing the science, the research, much, much earlier. And I think opening up the science, many different ways possible, I think that is, for me, the big change. And that's why we need innovation. We need to experiment. I don't know what's going to work. And many different things are going to work for different fields. But I think it's important to not shy away from this golden standard of peer review and try different things. I think technology can help us. Interaction, transparency can help us.
I think there are some parallels with book publishing, where we are getting often peer review on something that's only an idea, which, in some respects is great, because if it's a bad idea, you can prevent somebody, or an idea that somebody's already pursued before you can prevent somebody from wasting a lot of time on something. So, I would hope that our book authors find our peer review at that stage very helpful in crafting ideas around what they're aiming to do. And I get the sense you're suggesting that would be really helpful for researchers in terms of journal paper outputs, if they could have more input sort of while they're literally doing the research, as opposed to sort of right at the end where they've actually written it up. That would be valuable as well.
The data, the software, all these things that come together to eventually make a paper.
And Kenneth, sorry, you spoke, I think, in the context of journals publication about escaping that legacy of the print issue. I think that publishers have a responsibility to ensure that while technology supports the peer review process, the swift and timely publication of the best possible research, that we manage that increasing workload, the increasing number of submissions, but still remain true to that obligation at the heart of everything we do, the maintaining and promoting of quality. So I think that there are many opportunities there, not just for transparency, but open conversations with all the stakeholders, be they the researchers, the referees, the journal owners, and eventually the readers, about what is required and how we best serve that in a way that's reviewed on an ongoing basis.
I was just going to jump there, and I don't want to use this as a promotion, but we are innovating on those sides, exactly what you're talking about. We are thinking of how to get the software and the data on the peer review, to be peer reviewed at the time of the, when the article is being discussed. But we're also trying to, either by innovating ourselves or by partnering with startups, to help the manuscript preparation. So being there a little bit early and help that, for example, authors from very different places, like multidisciplinarity, but also geographic places, can collaborate in a manuscript earlier than we're talking about a journal, so earlier in the research. So we are trying to innovate there, but we need to collaborate with startups. We need to collaborate with authors that are happy to risk doing that, and some areas, and this is where maybe I feel a bit more confident in certain areas, especially in sciences and biology and computational biology. People are willing to risk that, to try that. So it's coming. It's coming.
I think it's, however, important for the researchers to not to get involved too early with the publishers and the commercial publishers, because I think there is a tension there. I'm sure your goals are to provide the best possible research, of course. But I think the commercial influence of publishers has not always being the most positive influence in disseminating these outputs. So I think there is room for collaboration, but I think it's very important for scientists to keep their independence and not rely too much. We rely already so much on publishers and on metrics that they provide. Not collaborate, but not rely on them too much and too early.
That's very helpful feedback. Well, if I may attempt to summarise this rich conversation, I think there certainly seems to be consensus around the fact that peer review looks different in different subject areas and across different content types. I think more traditional peer review will probably continue to be the gold standard in a number of areas. I hope we all agree that peer review can continue to, at its best, drive quality and excellence and supporting improvement along the way. Although pace of review is highly desirable in certain subject areas, particularly in journals publishing, pace should never come at the cost of quality of the peer review engagement and the review itself. And that, given what I just said about traditional peer review, publishers can continue to play a really important role, enabling much of this activity, although we have to absolutely keep challenging ourselves constantly about the overall experience for all stakeholders. I think it was very exciting and grounding to hear the importance of the quality of the conversation that we have with authors, be they HSS or STM journal authors or our potential book authors. That sense of partnership throughout the process just came through really, really clearly. I think Laurent has clearly articulated a number of challenges for the traditional peer review model, and I think your point about publishing versus dissemination, I'd like to think they're two sides of the same coin, but I hear you. And thinking really hard about when peer review should actually come in as a force for good, I think, is very interesting to sort of tease around. I think there are clear concerns about how a peer review model can keep up with the acceleration of output in certain subject areas. We clearly have to be very vigilant to bringing in unnecessary bureaucracy and slowness in having a sort of apparatus to support it. I think clearly a stakeholder in the academic environment, like the press, has to think harder about peer review and peer review models, what publishing will look like, whether supplemental or indeed alternative peer review models should be supported, what we can do to drive some of that hard thinking and modelling and experimenting. But I think it's really important for us as a publisher to keep connected with our communities, to engage them on what models could really support better experiences and outputs in their particular fields. There can't clearly be a one-size-fits-all here. And we have to learn from our sister publishers, I think, and from some of the organisations that Monica was alluding to, who are driving a lot of experimentation in this area, and that's very exciting. Kenneth has challenged us to think about post-publication peer review and how it can help us close the loop on what's been published and how future research can build on that sort of loop closing. And again, I think that's going to look potentially quite different across different subject areas and content types. And I think we haven't necessarily mined here today, but we need to think about how we can support the hard-pressed peer reviewer in any subject to be better recognised and understood that they provide a really essential service to everything we're collectively trying to do here. I think publishers as well as academic institutions, have to devote more energy and creativity to acknowledging and encouraging and recognising this service. So there's lots of challenges, but I'd like to say challenges are opportunities that have been surfaced in this conversation. And it's great to have Kenneth's and Laurent's external perspectives to prompt us to be more creative and give more time and energy to this. So I'd like to thank them sincerely for sharing their thoughts with us so frankly and clearly, but also to press colleagues for their inputs too. Thank you.